Yes, people are joining. That's nice. I saw only a few at the beginning, but now people are arriving. That's great. Hello, hello.
Good morning, good morning.
Good morning, lovely.
How are you, Jane? Good to see you.
Yes, good to see you too. I'm good. I have a little bit of a weird background. This is like really like a tiny Spanish living room in the house where I'm staying.
So are you,
door.
before everybody gets in the class, I guess, let me ask you, are you there for work in Spain?
Yes. Yeah, so I host, I just hosted 2 retreats, really nice. And now the day after tomorrow, I start with a 50-hour yin yoga training.
Wow.
So that's super nice. Yes.
Yeah. So, wow.
It's a beautiful beautiful place. Yeah.
I bet. And beautiful people too to meet.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. People from all over Europe. That is super nice. Yes. And how are you all doing?
We're doing good. We're almost done. It's crazy. Yeah.
Oh, how
it's
time
crazy.
flies.
It goes by fast. It has been an amazing experience. I don't have a lot of background to say that I got exposed early in my life in yoga, but to me, it has been an amazing experience. Just talking to my sister, I said, just for what asanas are, how many kinds of yoga there are there. And it's just like, I didn't know all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Nice.
But very incredible experience. Yes.
Lovely. That's so nice to hear.
Yes. Thank you.
And I hope it's the same for everyone. For everyone, thumbs up. Incredible experience, I hope. Yes. Nice. Good to hear. So I have the feeling that the internet will be pretty okay. I'm in another place now, and the router is literally next to my computer, sort of. So I hope that it will be okay. The moment it starts to jitter too much, then it makes sense to maybe disconnect your video. But I have the feeling that at this moment it's okay. So let me see, we have 12 participants now, and that is including Sarah. Yes, that's including Sarah. So I think we need another 2 people. Sarah, anyone not coming that you know?
I think Danielle won't be here.
Okay. And let me see what Cassie is saying. Okay, that's fine, Cassie. We'll see how it goes. Yeah, we now have 13. So then it means if Danielle's not here, then that makes sense. Then we are all here. So because there is quite a bit that I want to go through today, I didn't want to do too long of a centering, but I still feel it's always nice to do something. So before we actually start with the lecture, I just want to take a moment, also because you just woke up. So just to sort of get into the body and to get grounded. So you are welcome to come and sit on the floor if that's what you would like to do, or like on a yoga mat. You're also welcome to stay in your chair, of course. You're sitting on a chair. If you are on a chair, please make sure that you have your soles of the feet flat down onto the ground. So don't cross your legs, but really like ground your feet down. And then just feel the connection for a moment with the sitting bones, either down onto the ground or onto the chair. And then take a nice breath in. And then on your exhale, just closing your eyes and starting to bring your awareness inside your body. You can have your hands resting on top of each other in your lap. You can also have your hands on your thighs if you're sitting in a chair. So just feel for a moment that when you're sitting in a chair, that your back is a little bit away from the back part of the chair, so that you actually have to work a bit to keep your spine nice and upright. And then just for a moment, let's look into our alignment here. So first of all, if you're sitting on a chair, then you have the soles of the feet on the floor. If you're sitting on the ground, maybe in a more like Sukhasana kind of position, you'll feel parts of the feet connected to the ground, parts of the legs also. So just focus on a moment, for a moment, what is really like connected to the earth. And I find also that when you're sitting on a chair, even though the chair is in between you and the earth, it still sort of connects you to the earth. So you can also bring that awareness into your sitting bones here. Just feeling that lower part of the body and letting that part become really heavy and weighty. You can bring that awareness completely into the sitting bones and just noticing for a moment, for example, whether your weight is evenly divided over the sitting bones, or do you sort of need to lean a little bit more to the left or the right or front or back? Just really finding that balance. Becoming very sensitive to the pressure that you feel, the connection between the sitting bones and either the chair or the ground. Let that lower part of the body be really heavy. As it connects you to the earth, it really gives you that sensation of grounding. What I like about bringing that attention into that lower body is that it sort of pulls the energy out of the brain, out of the mind, into the body. Then from the sitting bones, let the spine, the torso, the shoulders, the head, the crown of the head rise up towards the sky. So you're finding length along the spine, along the torso. And then let the shoulders be away from the ears. And notice if you can open a little bit more that area of the lungs and the heart. But not sticking the lowest ribs forward too much. So you keep them in a bit so that you create like a sort of a corset around that lower part of the torso. And that gives you again some foundation, some stability for the lower back, to be able to sit upright without it costing too much energy. There's always that sort of slight engagement in that lower part of the torso, to give you some sort of a foundation in these seated postures. And then bringing the awareness towards your breath. And we'll just follow the flow of air, your natural rhythm, and just feeling how the body is being breathed. Nothing you have to do. Just feeling that flow of air coming in and out. And then just for a few breaths, let's start to take some control over the breathing. So you can start to elongate the length of the inhales and the length of the exhales. Maybe you want to even count the length of the inhales and the exhales. For example, 4 counts in and 4 counts out. Always breathing in and out through the nose. When you start to find that regular rhythm, that steady rhythm, breathing in and out through the nose, And you create a coherence between your breath and between the heart rate and the nervous system, bringing the body in a more relaxed state. And this is only a few minutes of centering, in general, a very powerful way to connect to your body. And I feel that before any yoga practice, it's great to do that, especially for before asana practice, so that you can move. When you start to move, you move from a really conscious way, conscious mind, awareness inside the body, being able to respect the body's boundaries. Let's take just one more breath cycle here. And then bringing the hands in front of the heart, Anjali Mudra. And then bowing your head towards the heart. And you can bring your thumbs up to the third eye, middle of the forehead. Namaste. And then bring the hands back down. So yes, I always really like this way of centering, this way of connecting to the body. And I think for any asana practice, it's so important to do that. I'm sure Sarah is teaching you all different ways how you can start a class like this. So I actually just wanted to know for a moment, who of you, and maybe you can do that by either giving me a thumbs up in your screen or doing it on video, but I'd really like to know who of you saw the pre-recorded session from last week. Most of you did, I think. Yeah, I see. Tasha, you did. You want to unmute yourself because I can't hear you. I don't know if you're saying anything to me or... I can't hear you. I'll just write it in the chat. Is it just me who can't hear Tasha? Nobody can hear her? No. Tasha, we can't hear you. I'm so sorry. So
I did it in the chat, Tasha.
Your speaker doesn't work. Okay. Did you get to see the pre-recorded though? Thumbs up, thumbs down, you did. Nice. So most of you saw it. That's amazing. I really hope that you enjoyed it. I think specifically that video from Paul Grilly is very amazing, very powerful. It gives so much knowledge on how we look at our students when you see a group of people practicing. And there are so many differences in bodies it's like, how do we look at the person that we have in front of us, and when you realize how bones can be so different, then you can also realize that sometimes for one person you would maybe suggest a specific modification in their pose, and for somebody else something else. So I wanted to know, I see now, Tasha, you saw half of it. Okay. I wanted to know if there were any questions specifically on this or on the respiratory system.
I had a question about breathing.
Yes, about breathing, yeah.
And so my understanding is that the diaphragm, that main muscle, is the agonist for the inhale, but not the exhale. Is that correct?
Yeah, you could say it like that. Yes. I mean, when you exhale, it's just literally the diaphragm is just relaxing. So it's this dome-shaped muscle that lies sort of here. When it contracts, it pulls onto the lungs, onto the bag that is around the lungs. So you can imagine that when it pulls down, that there is more space in the lungs for the air to get sucked in. Yeah. Now, when we are exhaling, it's just that basically surrendering or relaxing of that muscle that makes it go up again, meaning that the organs that, of course, as we go down, or as the diaphragm moves down, the organs need to go somewhere. So that's why the belly also extends forward, comes forward. And then the moment that the diaphragm relaxes and comes up, then the organs will be pressed back in. So the space of the lungs is getting smaller, and it means that the air gets pushed out. And then, of course, you have the muscles that aid as well with compressing the rib cage, that make that exhalation happen, and they are basically the muscles that really create that. So when you think about Kapalbhati breath, which I understood from Sarah, that I think you do that at the end of your hot yoga sequence, that breath where you really pull the navel in forcefully and you're just exhaling. It's basically that pressure of that navel being pulled in, which is then compressing basically this part. So the organs get pressed back in also, meaning that the diaphragm is just pressed up, and that's why there is this exhale happening in a forceful way. So it's not the diaphragm that sort of pushes up. I mean, it pushes up, but it's not through contraction. Do you understand what I mean?
I think so. So the diaphragm is engaged in the muscular sense only on the inhale, and it's all of these muscles throughout the rib cage that are helping force the air out on the exhale. That's what contracts on the exhale.
Yeah, exactly. And we have the transverse abdominis, but we'll talk about it in a moment, that runs here, and that works like a corset. And if that moves in, then also it just means that the air gets pressed out. Thank you for the question. Anyone else had a question either about respiratory system or tension versus compression? No? Then I have a few questions for you, just to see whether you understand the tension versus compression. So my first question is, when somebody is in a seated forward fold, Paschimottanasana, and they are having a lot of sensation in the back of the legs and along the back, then what is that? Are we talking about compression here, or are we talking about tension? Yes, tension. Yeah. When the belly is lying on the thighs, then that would be compression, of course. If there's no sensation in the back of the legs, in the back, but the belly is laying on the thighs, then that would be a form of compression. Now, what other question did I have for you? Yeah. Baddha Konasana, butterfly. When the soles of the feet are together and the knees are out, seated on the floor. And imagine that the knees are up quite high, but this person is not feeling anything in the groin, in the inner thighs. This person is actually feeling more in the outer hip. And it's not a broad area, but it's more like a smaller area, more pinpointed, more focused area, say somewhere around the hip socket on the outside hip. What is that? Tension or compression? Yes.
Tension?
Yes. No, compression. Carrie was saying it. Yeah. Yeah, that is compression. Because when we are in butterfly, you can maybe just visualize that pose before you. And if the knees are up high and somebody is really feeling it in the groin, then you could think, okay, you know, there they feel there's a lot of tension because it still needs to stretch. But if they don't feel anything there, it means that probably they've gone through already the whole feeling of, or they've been stretching those tissues already, but they're feeling it more on the outside of the hips, meaning that there would be a compression, and that can be a sort of probably medium compression, meaning for a part bone, but bone on flesh, so not bone on bone. Let's do another one. Down dog, Adho Mukha Svanasana. So when somebody is in the down dog and the heels are quite high away from the floor, they have actually no sensation in the back of the legs. But they do feel something in the front of the ankle. And it's not like a broad area, big area, it's a bit smaller area, sort of at the start of the foot. Let me see if I can. If they are feeling something sort of here and not at the back of the, like in the calves, what are we talking about then? Compression or tension? I see John said compression, but I think that was for the last, the one before. Yes. Yeah,
Tension.
No,
Tension?
it's compression. It's compression.
Again?
And yeah, and you know why you the best way sort of to see it is that the direction of the movement, when you are feeling it away from the direction of the movement, then it is called, then we feel tension. Then it can be fascia or scar tissue or skin being tight or muscles being tight. When you're feeling it in the direction of the movement, then it is compression. So think of that forward fold, Paschimottanasana. You're sitting on the floor, you're coming forward. When you have that sensation away from the movement, so it's not towards the belly or the thighs, but you're feeling it in the back of the legs, that's away from the movement, the direction of the movement, that is tension. And I think that is sort of the most clear example, and always then look at it like that. So when you're thinking of the belly is on the thighs, then that is compression.
Oh, got it.
Yeah, so try to see it, look at it a little bit more from that, in that sense, that you actually, always sort of take that as a reminder for this. Whenever you're thinking of any other joint, then think of that forward fold, because I think that is quite a clear one to remember. Then I was wondering, this is not so much about tension or compression, but what do we do when we see somebody in a downward facing dog, Adho Mukha Svanasana, and their arms are a little bit bent and their elbows are bent out? What could be happening in their body? And what is the, what could be happening in the body, and what would your reaction be? Cassie, and by the way, I'll get back to your question in a moment. So when somebody's in down dog and their elbows are out, Paul Griddy was showing this very well in his video. I just want to see whether you understood it. What can be happening in the body? And if you prefer not to write it in the chat, just tell me. Just unmute yourself. Edith, I think maybe you wanted to say something.
Yeah, let me see if I understand. So I know everybody has something to say, but I just want to get it. So it will be that they are putting tension in the back of their shoulders as well as the neck, and they need to straighten up their arm. Do you?
Yeah, it depends, because actually what you're thinking of is that either when their arms are out to the sides, it could be that they are lazy, so to say, and they're not, they're not really taking notice of how you actually want the alignment to be. Maybe they need to engage a bit more, and then they can start to straighten their arms. But what happens if there is a certain thing going on, like for example in their shoulders, when you think of them, and I don't know if you remember that, but we have this sort of thing that sticks out, which is the acromion process in the shoulder. And Paul Grilly also in his video, you see it very well, how people start to raise up their arm, and some people are here, and some people are here, and some people are all the way there. That has to do with the acromion process in the shoulder. So if you are here, and if you want to be in a down dog, you more or less are more in this kind of position. But if you can't get any further than here with the arm straight, then what would you have to do is you would have to want to work around the acromion process. So I'm going to work around it, circle around it. And what happens is then I have a bend in my elbow, meaning that the elbow will be out to the side. Yeah. Also remember, again, Paul Grilly's video with his wrist, for example, he had the issue with the wrist that he couldn't place his hands flat on the floor, because with the rotation in the elbow, from the elbow down towards the hand, he couldn't do that all the way. So he has a restricted range of motion there. Meaning that if he does want to get the elbow, or sorry, the flat hand on the floor, he needs to work from the shoulder, and he will also start to open the elbow out to the side. Yeah, so there can be various reasons why people do this. And the only thing that I want to bring it up again is I have seen yoga teachers that would just sort of think very straight lined and say, this is not what alignment should look like. It should be straight. And they would go over to someone and say, put your elbow straight. But some people can't do that. And does that mean that their down dog, their Adho Mukha Svanasana, is not okay? Well, for their body, it has to look like that, because otherwise they can't do it. And does that mean that then they cannot do yoga? No. Yeah, so that's what I think is very important, that we realize that. And of course, yes, there will be some people that they are bringing tension in the shoulders, and maybe that's also why they're doing this. And you can say like, okay, bring the shoulders away from the ears. And, it also has to do with knowing how the alignment should be. But when somebody knows how the alignment should be, and then you're then you're realizing that they just can't do it because of, for example, rotation of the forearm and the hands and the wrist on the floor, or something in their shoulders. Kanade, I think you have a question. You maybe want to unmute yourself.
Yeah. I have a question. So when the really muscular people, like with the bulky shoulder, does it tend to happen same way?
Also, when of course when you have somebody that works out a lot, and as you say, like they're super muscular, and then they are in general tighter anyway. So you can definitely tend to see that. Also, like with their down dogs, I tend to see more like they need to bend their knees, for example, to be able to come a little bit more in that down dog pyramid shape, so to say. You will also notice that sometimes, even though their arms are outside, that they still sort of can't really bring the arm towards the back. So their down dogs definitely look a lot different, and that is also a lot of tensile resistance still, or tension basically. Yeah. Let me see. Yeah, so some people already answered that also in the chat. And then Cassie was asking about the heel on the floor. And so if you have a down dog, and for a lot of people, the heels don't come all the way down to the ground, and that is completely fine. But when people have been doing yoga for longer, you tend to see that the heels are quite close to the floor or completely down. Some people have maybe been practicing for 15 years and they still don't get the heels down to the ground, and they are not feeling anything in their calves or in the back of the legs or in the Achilles tendon, meaning that for them, this is not a problem. There's no tensile resistance. But because of the bones here in the front of the ankle, they just can't bring their toes any closer in, basically, to the shin, meaning that maybe this is just, they can't go any more than a 90-degree angle. And then your down dog, yes, and also like a squat or something, will look very different. So, and then it's all shown in Paul Grilly's video. So please, if you're a little bit unsure, if you understand the concept, then you have access to that video, and you also have access to my lecture. So I would really recommend that you watch it again, because it's so great. It's really important for us, I feel, to realize as teachers, how many differences there are in bodies, and without thinking just in one straight sort of thought or line, like, okay, this is how it should look and that's how it should be. No, for some people, it's just not possible. Any questions on that? Maybe I stirred up something. No, all good. Then I have one more question for you, and you can write that in the chat. And I hope that I get as many muscles as through everybody. Everybody can write a few or one. So which muscles help with breathing? Inhale or exhale? Do you remember? Even if you don't remember the names, maybe the areas, or give me some sort of, how do you say, like something that I understand, that you understand the concept. So everybody's saying diaphragm, for sure, for sure. Do you remember any other muscles? Yes, Canade, exactly. The intercostal muscles. Yeah. The muscles that are in between the ribs, and the muscles, the outer layer, they pull the rib cage apart, so to say. So they broaden the rib cage. So that's for inhaling. And the inner layer, they actually pull the rib cage together. You maybe remember what other muscles? Are muscles in the neck helping? Yes or no? What do you think? Sternocleidomastoid. Gary, yes. So that's the muscle in the neck. The sternocleidomastoid is the muscle that, as I look to this side, then you would see it here maybe a little bit. This muscle. Then with the scalenes also in the neck. The ab muscles, yeah, for sure. The ab muscles, specifically the transverse abdominis, will help to compress. So with the exhale. Great. So in general, you can remember any muscles that are connected to the rib cage and that help with expanding the rib cage, for example, help with inhalation, and muscles that would compress the rib cage, making it smaller, they help with the exhale. Okay, well, if there's no other questions on these topics, then I would like to continue with the muscles. We were last talking about muscles in and around the shoulders. So I'm gonna share my screen, and you're welcome to, you can keep your video on or off. I have the feeling that the internet connection is going pretty great, so that is very nice. Very happy about that. Last time was a bit of a disaster. Let me see. Yes, there we are. So continuing with the muscles in the shoulders, the last muscles that we spoke about in the shoulders were around the shoulder blades. Remember the rotator cuff muscles? They were all about the internal and the external rotation in the shoulders, and a little bit of abduction. Now talking about the deltoids. The deltoids are basically like cupping around the shoulder, around the humerus. And you can see it here also in the picture. And there's three parts to it. We have the front, in anatomical terms, we call that the anterior deltoids. We have the middle part, lying sort of here. That's the medial deltoid, or you can also call it the lateral. And then we have the posterior deltoid at the back side. Now remember, muscles that lay towards the front of the body, when they contract and pull close, and they'll probably bring either into flexion or bring things forward. Things that are more to the side, muscles that are more to the side, when they contract, they'll probably bring about that abduction. And muscles that lay towards the back of the body, they are all about extension or external rotation. And muscles toward the front of the body will also help again with internal rotation. So, and those are just the things to remember. So when we think about the anterior side of the deltoid, the front of the deltoid, it's lying here. So you can imagine that it will help with bringing the arm up, for example, which we call flexion of the shoulder. And because it's here, it's towards the front, it helps with that internal rotation of the shoulder, bringing the arm in, shoulder in. And then also when I have my arms wide, so I'm abducted with the arms. Now that muscle lies here, the anterior deltoid. So when that starts to shorten, it will pull the arm back in, and we call that horizontal adduction, bringing the arms together. Now the lateral side, so the medial, the one that lies in the middle, basically the medial deltoid, towards the side, you can imagine that when that starts to contract, that it will pull the arm up, meaning abduction. That's the only action that this muscle does. And of course, these muscles, they are all connected to the arm, to the humerus, and then lying over the shoulder. So connecting either to clavicle, parts of the scapula. We'll go and just go to the next one. The posterior deltoid, which lies then more sort of here. And that muscle will help with extending the arm, bringing the arm towards the back in the shoulder joint. Instead of the front, the anterior deltoid was for internal rotation, helping with internal rotation. So when it's at the back of the body, it will help with that external rotation. And then you can imagine when you have your arms, for example, forward together, the muscle here has to relax now and lengthen. But when that starts to then contract and become shorter, then you can imagine that that will just pull the arm into what we call horizontal abduction. So the medials of the front side, the anterior side, and when I have my arms apart, will actually help with bringing the arms together. And when I have my arms together, it's the back side here that will help to bring the arms apart. So I hope that that is clear. And I show you a picture of how it looks from the side. So here you will see them all together, the front part, that middle part, and the back part. And you can see it's all connecting to the arm bone, the humerus, and then here over the shoulder, connecting to the clavicle, to the shoulder blade, different areas of the shoulder blade. So you can write this in the chat for me, please. Let's start with the first question. Which pose stretches the anterior deltoid, this side? What kind of postures? Tadasana. I mean, of course, if you're sort of opening into the chest and you're engaging a bit, then yes, you are bringing a little bit of a stretch here, but it's not a lot. Where would you think we have more of that? Tasha is saying in back bends. It depends a little bit It depends on, that really depends on the posture. Like you can imagine, for example, in a bow pose, Dhanurasana, when you're lying on your belly and you're taking your heels or your ankles, sorry, then yes, you'll stretch definitely here. Eh? But this is what I was actually looking for. Yes, what John and Carrie are saying. Yeah, clasping hands behind the back or prayer position behind the back. And when we really bring the arms behind the back, and that can be either in a reverse namaste or any other position, but arms behind the back, or like a humble warrior, eh? When you're interlacing your fingers behind your back, and then the moment that you open into the chest and before you basically come down into the humble warrior, you really stretch here. And cactus arms, if this is what you mean, Tasha, with cactus arms here, for sure also, yes, you are, you feel that, eh? You're stretching here. Cassie's also saying, yeah, camel, yeah, a little bit, yeah, for sure. So that's good, nice, you understand it. And then which poses stretch the posterior deltoid, so the one that lies at the back? Can you think of a posture? There's one that really, yes, Gary, love it. Garudasana, perfect. That is the one that I always like to hear. Because there we are really having to bring those shoulders forward. So you're stretching here and the muscles that are lying here in the back. Eagle arms. Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Let's continue with the upper arm muscles. Upper arm muscles, we have two muscles there. We have the biceps there, and we have the brachialis. And you see it in the picture here. Biceps, the word bi says it. It has two muscle bellies. And the brachialis lies a little bit deeper than the biceps, just below that or behind that, and a bit lower, as you can see. Now, the biceps, as you can see here, are connecting to the radius, meaning the bone that lies on the thumb side of the hand, from the lower arm. And then the brachialis connects to the ulna, so the bone that lies on the side of the pinky finger. You can imagine the brachialis, you can see, is connected to the humerus and then crosses over that elbow joint to the ulna. It's a shorter muscle also. But the biceps are actually crossing two joints. It's crossing the elbow and it's also crossing over to the shoulder because it's connected to the shoulder blade more. Also here over the shoulder. Now the radius rotates around the ulna. So although all these both muscles, so the biceps and the brachialis, they bring about that flexion in the arm, it is actually the brachialis that does it the strongest. You can imagine it's just connecting to the humerus and then to the lower arm, connecting to the ulna. But the biceps are connecting to the radius, which runs on the side of the thumb. And it's the radius that actually also brings about that pronation and supination. Supination is when you bring the hand into what you can call like a little cup or a soup bowl. That's how I remember it. And then pronation is with the hand down. So when you are doing a biceps curl, you really want to train that biceps more, then it's the best, and maybe I should stand up here for a moment. It's the best to actually do that supination. So as you can see, let me just do it a little bit more like that. Then you can see my hands as well. So if I'm holding weights here, I would supinate like bringing the hands into cups, and then you bring the weights up. So it's for the biceps, it's really that actually the main action is the supination of the hands. And it's the brachialis that really is that, just that flexion. Yeah, so if you want to create bigger biceps for yourself, then remember that at the gym. Yeah, so that's the movement of these two muscles that lay in the upper arm, the front of the upper arm. I'm just going to continue. If I go too fast, let me know. You can just either unmute yourself or write me a chat, and I will check in a bit, of course, to see if there are any questions. So here you see them all both also together. The biceps here, and as you can see here, that they're also running over the shoulder joint, basically. And this is the brachialis, a bit lower down. Then on the other side, on the front, we have the biceps, and then on the back of the arm, we have the triceps. And the word tri already says it. It has 3 muscle bellies. So 3-headed muscle, a long head, a medial, and a lateral head. As you can see here, partly connected, if you look at my mouse indicator, partly connected to the humerus bone, but also partly connected to the scapula, to the shoulder blade, and then running over the elbow joint. Now, if the front muscles at the front of the body, they help with flexion, that's their action. Then muscles at the back of the body, and they create extension. So if this is, of course, flexion, it's the triceps that will bring extension to the arm, but also a little bit that extension sort of in the shoulder. Yeah, because you can see that it's also running over the shoulder. So where the biceps is not really helping with flexion in the shoulder, it's really about the elbow, the biceps and the brachialis. Although the bicep run over the shoulder, it's not really a flexor. It's of the shoulder, it's about the elbow. But with the triceps, for sure, the triceps also help a little bit with the extension in the shoulder. And then, of course, also in the elbow. Yes. What also something to remember is when our elbows, of course, are fixed on the ground, meaning that the arms cannot go anywhere. For example, with a forearm stand, Pincha Mayurasana, then there, because it's connected to the shoulder blade, it will also rotate the scapula a bit upwards once the arm is fixed to the ground. Because then, it's the thing that can move basically is the shoulder blade. Now, this is definitely not an average a male person or a person. I think it's funny how sometimes they use these kind of models for their for anatomy, but here I'm just wanting to show you all the muscles together. Yeah, so we have the triceps in the back of the arm, and the biceps and the brachialis, and they are here. And then the brachioradialis is in the lower arm and helps also with that rotation, working on the radius bone. Now, not too difficult of a question. Please write it in the chat. What is the antagonist of the triceps? Yes, Sam is saying it. Tasha and John all, yeah, the biceps. Exactly. Add them also, yeah. And so this is one of those examples that is fairly easy to remember. One side of the bone and the other side of the bone, they are each other's antagonist. Yeah? So biceps and triceps are each other's antagonist. Other question, which pose is all about the triceps? Or which movement, maybe you can say, is all about the triceps? We do it many, many times in vinyasa practices. Bakasana, you could say, yeah, you could say so. But yeah, this is what I'm looking for. Chaturanga, for sure. Chaturanga Dandasana. That is really the pose that's all about the triceps. And the more vinyasas you do, you tend to feel it also. The shoulders and the triceps really get stronger, especially when you are lowering yourself down slowly. I actually really like that in my classes. I don't try to move too fast from one pose to the other, so that when you really move slow, as if you're moving through mud, especially with the chaturanga, you really feel like you're building strength there. Yeah, so most of you are saying that's the chaturanga, so that's great. So then, of course, we have the muscles also in the lower part of the arm, in the forearms, and we have the flexors and the extensors. When we are in anatomical position and we are like this anatomical position, and you're just looking at the lower arms here, then this is flexion of the wrist, and this is extension of the wrist. Yeah, extension of the wrist, flexion of the wrist. So the muscles that are lying to the front of the body, this is anatomical position. So we say that this is the front. This is the anterior side of the arm. Yeah, and the muscles at the front of the arm, at the anterior side, they are all helping with this flexion of the wrist and the hand and the fingers. Yeah, and what's on the back side of the arm, they will all help with extension. And there are many, many muscles in those forearms. You can imagine how specific things that we can do with our fingers, also how we can move our fingers. So we need a lot of muscles there. And there is, of course, this, really detailed things that we can do. And also when we balance, of course, onto our hands, that's all that stabilization of those muscles really help. So we have the wrist extensors on the back. You see what they say, palm facing down. So on this side, and palm facing up. The wrist flexors are on that side of the arm. And here in this picture, you can actually see how many different muscles there are in the hands, in those forearms, and they're all helping with movement in wrists and movement in fingers. Okay, then let me just stop sharing for a moment and see if there are any questions on the arm so far. I guess otherwise you would have probably put it in the chat, but just checking. No, everybody is good. That's great. Okay, then I think before we continue with the torso, then I want to give you a break now. And I'll give you, say, sort of 10 minutes. So if we can come back at 8:05, please, then I will see you then. Yes. See you soon. Okay, and we are back. Let me see if everyone is there. Hi. Okay. I have the feeling that probably everyone will be there, although their video is off, but that's fine. Just start to share my screen again if there's no questions on what we spoke about before. Muscles in the arm and shoulder. Then we'll continue with rib cage, chest and abdominals, and that's also in your manual from page 32. So I'll just go ahead and share my screen, and if there's anything, then of course just give me a little shout or via the chat. And then let us continue. Okay, making sure. Yes, first slide. So when we talk about the muscles that are in the torso and the rib cage or around the rib cage and the abdominal muscles, we have multiple layers of abdominal muscles. And the rectus abdominis is probably the most famous one, the one that everybody likes to train, and yeah, specifically for those who like to have a six-pack. As you can see here, if you look at my mouse indicator, you'll see that this is the rectus abdominis. So the ones that you see to the side is actually the transverse abdominis. So we're just talking about this one, the rectus abdominis. And basically, as you can see, it's not a six-pack, it's actually an eight-pack. And you see that there are 8 muscle bellies. But in general, it's these muscles here that actually get most of them, that you probably see mostly when you train them a lot. And then it also depends on yeah, whether your muscles actually show a lot or not. For some people, they lift up a dumbbell twice and they already, like, you can really see their muscle, for example, in their biceps. And for others, like for example, for me, I can yeah, do weights as much as I want, but you will never see a lot of yeah, structure in the muscle, so to say. Like, I never get really bigger muscle bellies. Let's see what there is in the I have no idea. I want to see a photo of that. Maybe next time you can you can show me a photo of that. Ask him to take off his shirt and funny. So the rectus abdominis, it's connecting, as you can see, part of the ribs and the sternum. So connecting here and here, and then connecting to the pubic bone down here. The action, it's lying towards the front of the body, as here. So remember what we said about that. Muscles at the front of the body flex the body. Yeah, so this is a flexor of the torso, basically. Of the spinal column, the vertebral column. Now, if you would actually keep the ribs fixed or the spine fixed, and you would engage, so instead of then making a crunch and the shoulders come up, you can actually tilt the pelvis and tuck the tailbone under. And I'll just show that to you for a moment. Yeah, so if this is the rectus abdominis connected to the pubic bone here. If I crunch, I'm bringing that flexion, which I'm doing like this, that would be flexion. But if I keep my spine straight, then actually it's a tilt of the pelvis. So I tuck my tailbone under, because what it basically does, as it engages, becomes smaller, it pulls the pubic bone upward or forward. Yeah. So with a lot of muscles, you have that they, of course, have both sides, connecting to both sides. And sometimes it's just one movement it can bring about, but sometimes it can be different movements, then depending on, yeah, both sides of where is the muscle connecting to. So here you can see the different layers. We have 4 layers of abdominal muscles. And why do you think that that is important, that we have that? Maybe that is something that you can write in the chat. Why do you think it's important, especially in this area and that lower part of the torso, that we have those layers of muscles? Yes, John, yes, protection of the organs. Yeah, we have, of course, yeah, Cassie, of course, it also helps us. The core is super important, so it helps us to stay upright for sure. But yes, when you think about it, this part of the torso is soft, as in like it doesn't have any bony structure. Of course, it has a little bit the ilium bones of the hips, but that is a bit more lower down. So this part, basically, where we have a lot of important organs, that's not protected by bone, not like how we have the rib cage over the lungs and the heart, for example. Yeah, Tasha, exactly. That's what you're saying. So yeah, so we have these different layers, and you can see that how they draw it also, that the layers are all having fibers running in different directions. So here we have the rectus abdominis. Here you can see those fibers are running straight down, vertical, meaning that as the muscle contracts, it will bring about that crunching, that flexion. Then you can see that the deepest layer is the transversus abdominis, lying here, and those muscle fibers are actually lying like this, horizontal. So you can imagine as if that starts to contract and the muscle becomes smaller, if that is working like a corset, you have that right here, deepest layer lying here, muscle fibers lying how you can see my fingers. So if that starts to engage and shorten, basically, then of course it will just pull in like that. Yeah, so that's why I like to call that sort of that corset. Then we have the obliques, the internal obliques and the external obliques. The external obliques is the outer layer, it's a bit bigger muscle, and the internal obliques are the layer that lie a little bit deeper than the external one. They, as you can see, have the fibers running diagonally. So the fibers are running like that. And actually, they're crossing because these fibers are sort of running diagonally up, and these fibers here are running diagonally down. And when we have these fibers of the muscles that are sort of diagonal, maybe you can remember that also a little bit what we have with the neck and some muscles in the back also, but they help with twisting. This is, by the way, you can see that big flat tendon. We also have that on the back. Remember, just below the latissimus dorsi, and it's called an aponeurosis. So whenever you have this big flat tendon sheet of fascia, that's called an aponeurosis. So the rectus abdominis, remember, flexion of the spine, or that tucking the tailbone under. And then the obliques, they are more to the side here. The fibers are running diagonally, and they help with twisting. If both sides would contract at the same time, then it also brings about flexion. Remember, that's the same with the neck. Remember that when you contract on one side, it helps with lateral flexion, and sometimes depending on the muscle, but in this case in the neck, for example, the sternocleidomastoid also helps with rotation. And that's a bit the same with the obliques. Yeah, so running, they're on the side of the body, here, the side of the torso, diagonal. If you contract both sides at the same time, it's flexion. If it's only contracting on one side, it will create that lateral flexion, and then it brings about rotation as well. Then the deepest layer, what I mentioned before, that is the transverse abdominis. lying deep inside, and those fibers running horizontal. I already said it. When it becomes engaged, or when it engages, it becomes smaller. So you can just imagine that it's like this corset that runs around here, sort of coming from here and then all around. So if that becomes smaller, it compresses. Yeah, it makes like a corset being pulled tight, basically. Meaning that this muscle, transverse abdominis, helps with exhalation. And specifically also when we do Kapalabhati breathing, so that forceful exhaling, pulling the navel in and up. The inguinal ligament is what you see here. That's where the transverse abdominis connects to, and also part of the obliques. Now, a few questions for you about those abdominal muscles. I'll just get the chat back out. So which poses stretch the rectus abdominis? You can also say which group of poses stretch the rectus abdominis. Up dog, for example, Carrie, yes. Kanade, I'm going to read your message in a moment. Just first seeing if I get an answer to the question. Yes, John, just in general, we can say any back bend. Dhanurasana, Sam, exactly. Yeah, but if you just want to group it, you can say any back bend, and a mild one or a really deep one, and they will all stretch here because we're bending backwards and you're bringing length along the front of the body. Now, before we go to the next question, I just want to see what Katara says. Just wanted to share, I learned a way to remember the direction of internal and external obliques. Same with internal and external intercostals. In internal chin, external to sex. Ah, the internal obliques towards the sexual organs. Ah, that's a good one. That's a really good one. Yeah, that is nice because sometimes you need those little things to help you remind. It's the same what I do with supination for me. Like, you know, I think I remember that bowl of soup, pronation, supination. So thanks for that, Katara. That's great. Then one more question about the transverse abdominis, the muscle that lies the most deep inside. Fibers are running horizontal, and it's like that corset being pulled tight when it engages. So in which bandha can you say that that uses the contraction of the transverse abdominis? And I'm not sure, of course, if Sarah already spoke to you about bandhas. So let's see if anybody knows the answer. If it's maybe not from Sarah's classes, maybe something that you heard somewhere or read somewhere before. And I see John has got the right answer. Yes, Uddiyana Bandha. Exactly. So Uddiyana Bandha sometimes is said like pull the navel in and up. There's various ways to sort of explain it, but in general, it is really that deepest layer of the abdominal muscles and that compression. So yes, great. Uddiyana Bandha. Okay. I'm just going to continue. Please remember, if I need to slow down, or if you have a question, then please just let me know in the chat or unmute yourself. So I didn't really want to go back to talk in detail again about the diaphragm and other muscles in the between the ribs, because I spoke about that in the lecture that's pre-recorded from last week. But just quickly, just showing you again the picture of the diaphragm, that big dome-shaped muscle that helps with breathing, and specifically, you can say the inhalation. And then we have the intercostals, and they are 3 layers. And they all lie in between the ribs, and they help with inhale and they help with exhale. Because inhalation, that's the outer layer, broadening the rib cage, and the inner layer is, or the inner two layers, they will, how do you say, contract the rib cage, and that means that the air gets sucked out. And I wanted to continue with the chest. Yeah, we have two pectoralis muscles. We have the major and the minor. This is the pectoralis major, and you can see where it's connecting. It's connecting to the sternum, and also a little bit here, connected to the ribs, or to the rib, the sixth rib. Then it connects to the front of the humerus, a little bit lateral of the humerus. So, and not too much on the medial side, a little bit more laterally. And yeah, sort of running here basically. The movement that this muscle brings about, you can imagine if I would bring my arm to the side, abducting, then there is already a sort of a tension here, like that little part, if you look at the mouse indicator here, is being stretched. So you can imagine when this muscle contracts, and you can see again, if you look at my mouse indicator, you can see the lines of the muscle fibers, they're all running horizontal. So if that muscle becomes shorter, it will just start to pull the arm in. And that's, remember, we call that horizontal adduction. But if I have my arms out to the side and I'm bringing the arms in, you will feel it also. You can hold your hand just on the muscle here, and you will feel that it's also working here. So adduction, that horizontal adduction. And then also, since it's towards the front of the arm, when it contracts, it will also pull the arm into internal rotation, medial rotation. And sometimes when muscles are a bit bigger, you saw that also with, for example, the deltoid, it has three parts. You saw it with muscles in the back, like, for example, the trapezius muscle. Muscles have sometimes different parts and that have different actions. So that's why some part of the muscle might work more on that abduction in this case, of adduction, for example, in this case, and another part of the muscle might be working more for internal rotation. When we think of like this part of the muscle is probably more helping with that internal rotation, for example, the upper part. Then I'm gonna show you the pectoralis minor. You can see that it's actually a lot smaller. It lies deeper than the pectoralis major. And you can see that it is connected to the coracoid process. This is the acromion process. Remember that roof that we have at the shoulder where, you know, you can have that problem of that flexion of the arm and that compression. But this is the coracoid process, also part of the shoulder blade, the scapula. You can see that it connects to the ribs and connecting to the shoulder blade. The fibers are running in a more, you can say, slightly diagonal or vertical way, while the fibers of the pectoralis major were running horizontal. Yeah, so that's also a difference there. So you can imagine if it's connected here, and look at my mouse indicator, to the ribs, and if it contracts and it becomes smaller, then it's going to pull the shoulder blades down. Yeah, so it's a downward depression and downward rotation of the scapula, because as it pulls this down, you will get a little bit of this in the scapula. Now, it also helps with breathing, because the moment that I am not going to do anything or let anything happen with the shoulder blades, and I'm just going to keep my shoulder still, the moment you're going to contract this muscle, instead of pulling onto the shoulder blade and bringing that depression to the shoulder or that a downward rotation. If you keep the shoulder still, then actually what it does, it's going to pull on the rib cage, because it's really nicely connected here to the rib. So it's going to pull up onto the rib cage, meaning that it will make the rib cage bigger, meaning that it helps with inhalation. It expands the rib cage. And here we have a picture where you can see how they lie underneath each other. So this is the pectoralis minor, and then the pectoralis major is laying over it. You can see here, and you can see how the fibers run in different ways. So I hope that's clear. Now, a question about the pectoralis major. You sometimes tend to find that on bodybuilders. So which posture in a body do we see when this muscle is becoming really tight or short? You can write that in the chat for me. What happens when you do a lot of bench presses? Yes. Carrie says shoulders rolling in. Yeah, so I have the idea that that is the same what I would say, like a little bit that rounding forward. Yeah, because it's pulling here. So completely correct, Carrie. And what happens if we don't ever do any back work with towards the strength in the back? Because if you're of course strengthening the back, then at least also you would find some balance there. So if you're just working on the front here, you're just going to sort of create this more like rounding forward, which means that you're also compressing the area of the lungs. And you're compressing in for your breath, like making the breath maybe flow less free. So that's why also it's so good to make sure that you do these postures where we open into the chest. So that's why yoga is so great, of course, but also any exercise. If you're not a yogi, but it's more about like just doing fitness weight training, also make sure that you train then the back muscles. And you will need to train on retracting the shoulders. So working on the rhomboids and parts of the trapezius muscle. Okay, then let us continue with the pelvis and the hips. So the iliopsoas, an important muscle in the body, a muscle that also has a sort of an energetic meaning to it. We tend to hold a lot of tension there. It's closely connected also to the diaphragm, so also connected to how we breathe and the change in our breath. And if we're stressed or anxious, then our breath changes, and that tension will also have an effect on the psoas, on the iliopsoas. So basically, the iliopsoas is a name for two muscles. The psoas major, which is this one. If you look at my mouse indicator, you see it's here. It's running from the transverse processes of the lumbar spine and then running through the pelvis to the femur bone on the medial side of the femur bone. And then the iliacus, and that's it has the word ilium also connecting the names together. Ilium bone. So it's the muscle that runs from that the crest of the ilium bone and comes together with the psoas major and then comes together in that one tendon that comes to the femur bone. But for the ease of it, we tend to call this the iliopsoas, everything together. Now, this is a super strong hip flexor, meaning that it can either help you bring your leg up, for example, in Utthita Asthapadangusthasana posture, when you're standing and it's the hand to the big toe and you're holding yourself up in that balance. There also you really work, of course, the hip flexor. the iliopsoas is working hard, and then also helping with external or lateral rotation of the femur. Now, and I'll try to show you for a moment. So maybe I should do it a little bit more like this. It's maybe a little bit handier. Go a little bit more backwards. So a hip flexor, meaning that this movement, the iliopsoas helps with, but also this. And of course it has to work harder like this because it's just the weight of the leg now that it has to carry. But if I don't move, like if I don't move my legs and my spine and the feet are just grounded, then also what the iliopsoas does is when it contracts is that posterior tilt. Sorry, no, anterior tilt. Sorry, it's bringing the hip bones forward. Let me see if I say that correctly. Yes, the anterior tilt of the pelvis. Yeah, so and that's what I said before. You know that also now with the rectus abdominis, it's sometimes a muscle can bring about different movements in the body, but it just depends on to what sides it is connected to and which part of the body are actually, for example, fixed to the floor or to your yoga mat. So strong, very strong hip flexor, lateral rotation, and then the tilt of the pelvis. Here you can see it in connection also with the rest of the body, a bit more clear maybe. You also see here, these are the muscles that adduct the legs. They are connecting to the inside of the femur and then towards the sitting bones. And then here you can see how the iliopsoas runs. So for which yoga posture is this muscle a key player? Where does it really need to work very hard? Of course, I showed you already one pose, but there is another posture where it really, really needs to work hard. See if you can think of which one that is. You can write that in the chat for me. John says Paschimottanasana. I guess so, although the legs are on the ground and you are engaging into your legs, and of course you are engaging as you're coming to the forward fold. But once you are in the forward fold, I have the feeling that the hip flexor doesn't have to work so hard anymore, because it's also like the gravity is pulling on your back. You're engaging into your leg muscles, of course. I'm looking for another posture. In which pose do we have the legs lifted away from the floor? A lot of people get this, they see it wrongly because they think that it's the abdominal muscles that do most of the work, but it's not. I mean, maybe that gives you, yes, Gary, yes, boat pose, exactly. And Navasana. In Navasana, we're just balancing on our sitting bones. We're in this sort of shape. This is my spine, my back, my torso, and these are my legs. So here, just as with the posture where you bring that one leg up, holding the big toe, Utthita Hasta Padangusthasana, those are the postures where that muscle has to work so hard because it literally has to carry the leg or the legs in both pose, both legs. So a lot of people think that boat pose is where we work on the core. Well, of course we work on the core. We have to contract the core muscles as well to keep the spine nice and straight. But the muscle that is working the hardest in that posture is the iliopsoas, is the hip flexor. To keep the legs up. Remember that. Now I wanted to talk a little bit about what muscle groups can cause lower back pain and why. We have, and I think that I might just stop sharing for a moment. Not put myself on speaker view just for the recording. I see a question coming into the chat. Tasha's saying iliac everything, but I think you just mean the iliac, the iliopsoas. Maybe is that what you mean? Yeah, that it caused you a lot of problems. So that's what I actually wanted to speak about also. That of course, it can be that you have lower back pain and that the lower back pain is literally coming from something in the lower back. But nowadays also, or not just nowadays, but it's been, of course, it has to do with our life since like sort of more modern life, so to say, instead of when we were still living in the forest. Our bodies have changed because of the work that we do, and so lower back pain is a lot of time caused by muscles that are actually not in the lower back. For example, the iliopsoas muscle. If the iliopsoas muscle is really tight, it will pull on your lower back and it will cause you lower back pain. Then, for example, the hamstrings. When the hamstrings are really tight, they are also connecting to the pelvis, to the sitting bones. That will also pull on your lower back and can cause you lower back pain. And I'll just show you that for a moment. Step away from the computer again a little bit. So when the iliopsoas is tight, remember what I said, when my feet are fixed to the floor, it's sort of gonna do that anterior tilt of the pelvis. So you're sort of sticking your butt out, and that can cause compression in that lower back. Now, when the hamstrings are tight, they're on the back of the legs, we'll speak about them in a moment, depending on how much time we have, they will be pulling onto the pelvis, and they are actually pulling a little bit into a rounding into that lower back. There's a pull there as well. So can you imagine, or can you, and maybe you can write it in the chat for me, can you think of a reason that why nowadays so many people have also this tight iliopsoas, tight hip flexor, and tight hamstrings? What do we do a lot in our daily lives, unfortunately? Most people. Let's see if anything comes into the chat. Yes, thank you very much. Sitting. We sit a lot. And let me see, you said, Tasha said, as a dentist assistant, yes, you're sitting, so you're already rounding in your lower back, but you're also rounding forward because you need to do certain things and need to lean over someone. So sitting in an office chair, sitting on the sofa, sitting at dinner, at your dinner table, sitting while you're driving in your car, we're sitting a lot. Sitting is so bad for us because it will make the iliopsoas shorter, and it will make our hamstrings shorter. And that means that it starts to pull on, the joints in the bone structure, so that it will cause, it can really cause problems in the lower back. There's this pull on the lower back. Sitting is just constant slight flexion of the lumbar spine, of the lower back. And when we, for example, stand, there is this natural hollowing. We call that a lordosis, but we are actually always bringing that lower back in a kyphosis when we're sitting. So that's why nowadays it is so great that you also get to have standing desks, for example. It's much better to be standing or walking than to be seated. So you'll probably get to do a little assignment with Sarah also at some point about this. But muscles that are not in the lower back that can cause lower back pain, remember, it's a tight iliopsoas, a tight hip flexor, and it's tight hamstrings. And there are many yoga poses that help to stretch those muscles. So when you stretch those muscles, getting them to lengthen, you might be helping your lower back pain. And of course, again, lower back pain can also come from a hernia or from nerve pain. So, I mean, I'm not saying that that is always the cause, but for many people it is. And nowadays, I always ask before I teach a class, does anybody have an injury or something I need to know? I mean, say 6 out of the 10 people will always say that they're having problems with their lower back. So it's very, very common. Now, one more thing. So we have, please remember these two things. We have either tight iliopsoas and tight hamstrings. They can cause that lower back pain. Also, a tight glute, of course, can also bring tension, but also the abdominal muscles. And when we have a weak core, so not too tight, but weak, when there is a weak core, there is no support for the lower back. So we also want to make sure that we have a strong core, and that can also help lower back pain. Yeah, remember this, because you will probably get a little assignment from Sarah about this. Yeah, John says long drives used to mess me up. Yeah, before I did yoga. Yeah, makes sense. I'm just gonna share my screen again with you. Sarah is writing something in the chat. We will do this assignment today. Great, Sarah. Okay, share. Let me see. Yes. There we go. So what can we do to prevent this? We can either, if the problem is a weak core, we can of course do training to create a more stronger core. That can be also through yoga. Many poses in yoga will create a strong core. Think about planking, also like Navasana. I mean, lots of poses will work on a strong core. And then we also can work on poses that will stretch the iliopsoas and the hamstring. Now, which poses stretch the iliopsoas? The hip flexor muscle. Let's see if you maybe can come up with a few postures. Maybe you know, you can write it in the chat for me. So which postures really stretch the hip flexor in a nice way? Standing bow, camel, reversed warrior, Bakasana. Bakasana, you actually need to engage the hip flexors because you're pulling, you're bringing, it's basically, Bakasana is basically a forward fold. So Autumn, I hope that you get that. The idea, what we want to do is, yes, more of a back bend, or postures like lizard pose, for example. That is an amazing posture to stretch that hip flexor. So Sarah, yes, we spoke about lower back pain. That's what we're talking about now, and where it can come from, just to answer your question in the chat. Let's see what, yeah, so a lot of you are talking about these back bends, and of course, the back bends for sure. But for sure, also think about the hip flexor stretches in, like, for example, in yin, for example, for dragon or lizard, also in yang yoga. And all these that you already mentioned, camel, bow, reversed plank also. So just anywhere we're sort of opening that front of the body. Also, like with the dancer's pose, you really can pull that bent leg towards the back. So that's like nice opening, nice stretching there. And stretching of the hamstring before we continue with the piriformis muscle. And stretching of the hamstring, just think of any forward fold, of course, where you feel that in the back of the leg. So that really helps, of course, with stretching hamstrings. So the yin postures, let me just go back for a moment, see if I can do that. We have dragon, which is basically sort of the same as lizard in yang yoga, and swan or sleeping swan is actually the same as pigeon. And a saddle is virasana, where you have your knees bent and you're lying back, either over bolster or blocks, or so you're internally rotating into the hip joints, but also there's that quite a big stretch of the quadriceps there. And then also you're creating that length on this part of the body, which of course means that you're stretching the iliopsoas muscle. Yeah, so swan, basically, swan is the same as pigeon, but in yin, they use different names. That can be a little bit confusing, I have to say. But yeah, of course, yeah, I teach a lot of yin. So for me, it's now all clear, but I can imagine for some people, it's like, huh, what's this? But yeah, swan is basically the same as pigeon. Ekapada Kapotanasana. Okay, then we go to the pelvis and the hips. And also wanted to talk about the piriformis muscle. Let me see, yeah, we still have a little bit of time. Because the piriformis muscle can also bring about quite a bit of problems. And I also find, I'm just wanting to share with you like what I find mostly, that where people come into yoga classes and the problems that they have. And I said before, lower back pain is something that I hear so often. But what I also hear often is sciatica or piriformis syndrome. A lot of people have issues with that. And sometimes they don't even know that it's that, but they're just talking about, yeah, I have this pain in my glute and it runs all along my leg. And when people tend to say that, especially when it's sort of, it's not so much fixed in one spot, so not just in the butt, but it really sort of like a nerve pain that goes through the whole leg towards the foot, then please remember to straight away think about sciatica or piriformis syndrome. But let me first, before we go there, show you the piriformis muscle. So the piriformis muscle lies quite deep into the butt. The glutes are over it, basically, and you can see it lying here. It's a small muscle, and it's part of the group that externally or laterally rotates the leg, the femur in the hip, with hip extension mainly also. So you can think of half moon, Ardha Chandrasana. That's a posture where the piriformis is really working hard. And then also it can abduct the femur when there is hip flexion, and then you can think again of tree pose, for example. So Ardha Chandrasana is with the straight leg, and that is more that external rotation of the leg. And then it abducts the femur with hip flexion, and then you could think of tree pose, Vrikshasana. This muscle also, because it is connected to the sacrum, which if you look at my mouse indicator is sort of lying here, one side of the sacrum. So it also sort of connects the femur and the sacrum. So it gives the stability to the SI joint in the hips. Now, to show you a little bit more what happens with the nerve that runs underneath that muscle. So L5, that is the nerve that comes out of L5, the lowest vertebra. So if you look at the mouse indicator here, and that is a thick muscle, a thick nerve, you can see it, and it runs underneath the piriformis muscle. So it's running in between bone of the pelvis and the muscle. You can see that here. And this is called the sciatic nerve. And you can imagine when your piriformis is really tight, when a muscle is tight, it pulls short. It means that it starts to pull or push, sorry, onto the nerve, because if this is tight, it is just going to press down onto the nerve and pressing the nerve into the bone of the pelvis. And when that happens, you can see it here in red, that nerve starts to become like inflamed, irritated, very sensitive, and that is what causes the pain. And that's why, yeah, a term is sciatica, another term is piriformis syndrome. Sciatica, I mean, because probably there are also other reasons that that nerve can be irritated and painful, but specifically when it has to do with the piriformis muscle being tight, then it is called the piriformis syndrome. Yeah, and you might have had it, or maybe you know people that have had it, or maybe now it rings a bell if someone ever says to you, yeah, I have this pain, and sometimes it can also radiate a bit in the lower back. You can feel it in your butt, and then all the way, if it gets worse, it runs all the way through the leg, and it's really painful and annoying. And yeah, that is what we call sciatica or piriformis syndrome. So if it is piriformis syndrome and that muscle is tight, it means that when we start to stretch that muscle and we can bring some more length to it, that actually then that pain would go away, and you would help it. So yeah, maybe you can think of postures that will stretch the piriformis. And maybe I just show you one more time. Let's see that you can see me. Yeah, you can see me. So tree pose is the knee is the hip is in flexion. There is this flexion in the hip. Then it abducts the leg. And Ardha Chandrasana, half moon, it's that external rotation of the straight leg. You saw how the muscle ran in the body. So what poses do you think can stretch this little muscle in the butt that can cause so many problems? And you're welcome to write it in the chat. Maybe I'll just go back to that you can see here how it's running. Maybe you get a bit more of an idea. Tasha is saying a forward fold. Not so much. Autumn is saying Gomukhasana. Yes, definitely. Yeah, because you're instead of bringing that abduction, you're adducting. So think a little bit more in that sort of way of postures. Wind removing pose. Yes. So wind removing pose, I assume that make sure that we see it at the same one. It's like where you hug your knees into your chest. Now, specifically, you can imagine if you look at how this muscle is running, if you would bring the adduct the leg, it really helps a lot. So if you are pulling your knee into your chest, then instead of sort of pulling it straight in, try to actually bring it a little bit more, the knee across the body towards the opposite armpit. Side plank with leg lift. No, because then you're actually engaging more there. So I'm going to show you my list of poses, and I would say definitely here we're talking a little bit more, maybe also not so super intense posture. You're thinking of poses where we don't have to engage so much, or at least not in that region. We want to stretch in that region. So swan and pigeon are really great for stretching the piriformis. And that can also be, for example, a figure 4 pose. Then Ardha Matsyendrasana, because there we are actually adducting the leg. We're bringing the leg almost across, stepping it over the other leg. So you're bringing that leg across the body, so you can see that as a strong adduction. Dragon and lizard. And then that was I think it was Kanade that said that the wind relieving pose, where you lie on your back, but then if you would just say that you have it specifically on your right side, and instead of just bringing the right knee in like this, you're trying to pull it more across the body, this kind of movement. Yeah, because then you really start to stretch the muscle in the butt. Now, one more thing that's important here to realize, nerve pain sort of comes and goes. It tends to flare up. It can be really bad, and then it sort of goes away a little bit again. So if somebody has it like very strongly in a certain moment and it's really flared up, then you of course don't want to do these poses, and because these poses stretch the muscle. So when the muscle is stretching, and if it's already short, it will actually push more onto the nerve. So you're basically doing these stretches the moment that it's not flared up so much, the moment that you are not so much in pain, and then you do these postures. So if you would add these poses into a sequence, I have done in my private yoga classes when I had people that actually had sciatica, I did a lot of these kind of postures that you see in the list here. Then yeah, that was really, really helping them. So it's a good one to remember. And then I see we have 2 minutes left, so I'm gonna leave it at this, and then next time we'll talk about the glutes and finish the legs, and that will probably only take about half an hour to 40 minutes, and then we're gonna continue with the nervous system, and then after that we'll also talk about the circulatory system and the digestive system, most likely. Let me see. So I'm going to just stop sharing my screen for a moment again. Yeah, and then I'm going to bring you back into gallery view, and just wanted to check if there are any questions on what I spoke about before, about the stretching, the postures that we can do to stretch the piriformis. And if you like, I can also send some of these slides that talk a little bit more about what stretches, for example, also the hip flexor when you think about the lower back pain, or which poses stretch the piriformis muscle. I could send slides over in the WhatsApp if you like. Yeah, I see already Tasha saying that you would like that. So I will definitely make a little PDF out of that and send it to you. And let me just write that down. And any questions then on that issue of the lower back pain, issue of the sciatica or piriformis? You're welcome, Tasha. No, I have the feeling that everybody is good. That's great. That means that hopefully I was being super clear. So I think if I'm not mistaken, I think you have an hour sort of break before then you go to the studio. So yeah, Canada is saying yes, great. So I wish you another beautiful day in your training. And then, oh my God, it's going really fast. I assume that you're probably already preparing also for exams and things like that. Yeah, exciting, as in like I'm assuming that you have to teach a class, right? Yes or no? Yes. Everybody gets to teach a class or part of a class. Amazing, really nice. Well, good luck, guys. I will see you again next week. And yeah, I'll send over that PDF probably. Not sure if I do that still tonight, but I'll do it soon. Yeah, so you have that. Good luck today, and thank you. Namaste, and see you next time. Bye-bye.